Hello, future phantasms. If you're watching this right now, you're probably alive. Well, maybe ghosts watch this, but I would think that there are better things to do in the afterlife. Regardless, most of you here are living. And you know you're living. But how? Is the act of living determined by your ability to feel your physical self? Is it sensory-based? Is it in your ability to laugh or cry or feel emotion? Is it a conscious state of reality at all? We've all heard that sometimes the dead can't move on from this plane of existence because they think they're alive. But what happens when the living think they're dead? I'm DreyOfTheDead, and it's time to feed your head. For 17-year-old Haley Smith, life in Alabama seemed normal enough. Of course, normal at 17 for most people still feels like you're away from your home planet. Do you remember being 17? I do. Ugh. On top of the usual teenage stressors, Haley was confronted with a devastating new reality. Her parents were divorcing. While divorce is not uncommon in America, for many kids Haley's age and even younger, the experience can feel catastrophic. While some situations are peaceful, more often than not, the separation of parents ends up being a prolonged and emotionally chaotic black hole of sorts. Its gravitational pull consumes everything in sight, and its destruction extends far beyond the two parties involved. The aftermath of such an event can feel like navigating the ruins of a war zone. The once fortified structures of your life end up feeling like a smoldering pile of rubble, and sometimes that's not the easiest thing for a 17-year-old developing mind to fully grasp. After the divorce, Haley tried to go about life as usual until one day in English class when a strange sensation crept in. She struggled to identify it and tried to shake it off, but was unsuccessful. She went to the school nurse, who was absolutely baffled by the girl's description of her symptoms and couldn't find anything wrong with her. Walking home from school, Haley felt a strange urge to visit a graveyard, but there were none nearby. She wanted to be close to the dead. But why? Did she feel like dying? No, it was something else. Something beyond that. She felt already dead. Sensing that that sounded absurd, she went home and tried to sleep it off, and for a few days the feeling was gone. Then one day, while out shopping, the strange sensation crept back up her spine. She felt her whole body go numb, dropped all the dresses she was holding, and ran out of the store. Scared and confused, she began to feel like she was going mad. After that, she couldn't make the feeling go away, and it only got worse. She descended into a state of isolation. She skipped school, slept her days away, and stayed up all night. Her strange compulsions grew, and she fantasized about having picnics in graveyards. She started watching horror films, not for the thrill of being spooked, but because the sight of zombies made her feel relaxed. Growing up as a goth kid, I know, right? You would have never guessed. This might not sound all that strange. I mean, who among us hasn't fantasized about or pulled off a cemetery picnic? Horror movies and an intimate relationship with death? Count me in, right? And especially as a teenager, don't even get me started on being a 17-year-old weird girl with unconventional interests. But this was different. This was a state of mind Haley couldn't choose and didn't want. This was something that she couldn't even share with others for fear of people labeling her as crazy. As if being a teenager in the midst of a divorce wasn't hard enough, now she was dealing with a confusing physical and mental plague completely alone. As time went on, Haley surrendered to the sensation, accepting that this would simply be her life, or lack thereof. The world seemed gray. Her senses were dulled, the usual pleasures of life were meaningless, consequences seemed trivial at best, and nothing seemed to matter anymore. She withdrew from friends and family and started eating indiscriminately because how could a dead girl gain weight? After 2 years of dealing with this alone, Haley reached a state of despair and reached out to her best friend. She told him everything, waiting reluctantly for him to look at her like she was some kind of freak. But to her surprise, he just listened and nodded and never once made her feel othered for what she was going through. This conversation gave Haley the confidence to confide in her dad. Supportively, he urged her to speak to a psychiatrist, and with this small bit of courage, Haley finally discovered what was plaguing her. She was diagnosed with Cotard syndrome, an ultra-rare disorder that causes sufferers to genuinely believe they are dead. Also known as walking corpse syndrome, this form of delusional psychosis was first identified by French neurologist Jules Cotard in 1880. Its cause is a malfunction of the amygdala, the area of the brain that processes emotions, as well as the fusiform gyrus, which allows the brain to recognize faces. Along with feeling as though they are not alive, patients often believe that certain parts of their bodies no longer exist. For example, one woman with the disorder negated the existence of her brain, nerves, chest, and entrails, believing she was, quite literally, made of skin and bones. In extreme cases, some even die of starvation, believing that they don't need to eat because they're dead. Many lose the ability to recognize faces, further disconnecting them from the living. Though there is no cure for Cotard syndrome, it is often treated with antidepressants and antipsychotics, as well as modern electroconvulsive therapy. For Haley, simply discovering that this was a real illness was enough to give her hope. She went online and found stories of other people who suffered from it, and they too shared her compulsion to spend time in graveyards. Oddly enough, Haley contributes her biggest step toward recovery to Disney films. Watching movies like The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Sleeping Beauty, and Bambi invoked something familiar in her. A warm, fuzzy feeling. The feeling of being alive again. In 2015, Haley went on to share her story with the world, hoping to reach others who suffer from the same syndrome and let them know that there's hope. She credits much of her recovery to her boyfriend Jeremy, whom she planned to marry and get jobs with at Disney World. Being a corpse was the most bizarre experience, she said, but I'm so glad I managed to get out alive. If you enjoyed this strange but true tale, be sure to subscribe and check out previous episodes. We put out new videos every other Friday. If you enjoy blooper reels, Q&As, and behind-the-scenes footage, If you enjoy blooper reels, Q&As, and behind-the-scenes footage, become a patron. These are just some of the patrons who make these videos possible. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be well and stay strange.